Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition or the special COVID edition of the sales webinar series that we run here at the Center for Professional Selling at Ball State University. My name is Deva Rangarajan, and I'm the host. And today we have another international guest. We have Professor Paolo Guenzi from SDA Bocconi, a premium institute in Italy, going to share his views on how can salespeople maybe use more of these digital tools to get access to their customers, especially when you have these lockdown and other coronavirus, COVID related issues as well. So Professor Guenzi, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and the audience.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and to share some of the knowledge that we develop in our research center.
Indeed. So one of the things that you have, so essentially SDA Bocconi has a commercial excellence lab, which does a lot of very, very interesting projects. Tell us about the origin of this research. Why did you come up with it? Was it a structural research, or was it something that you say, we have to do this because things are happening right now?
Okay, thank you for asking this. Well, we have a research stream on the impact of technology on sales organizations. So we have been investigating this topic in the last 3 years with different angles and perspectives. So this is the background. Then against this background, what happened is that in Italy, we were hit by the COVID-19 very, very rapidly and very hardly. And the relatively interesting thing is that what we did is that we did this, what we call a snack research. We had not planned to do it, but we saw that things were changing very, very rapidly, immediately, suddenly, overnight. And so we decided to do this instant survey. And maybe I think we've been lucky because we did it before the lockdown. So even before the lockdown, we wanted to see what was going on in sales organization and how salespeople, more specifically, were dealing with the difficulty in keeping their relationship alive with their customers. That basically was the core intention.
So when you did this, do you think that it was kind of fortuitous? Do you think that some of the results, which we'll discuss soon, is that if you were to run the same study now, do you think the results that we'll discuss soon would have been the same, or you see what I mean? Or it would have been more pronounced?
No, I think they would definitely be different. And we have some data about it because we collected, basically, we used the same survey instrument before the lockdown, and we kept it online after the lockdown. So we can compare a few things.
Yeah.
Not everything radically changed overnight again because of the lockdown. Basically, after the lockdown, everybody say, well, we have no option. We can't do anything because everything is closed. So there is really nothing we can do. In some industries, that's exactly how it is.
Indeed.
I think what we found could be more interesting for what will happen after the crisis, in a sense, because when they have to restart, probably they will still have a lower level of contacts, of face-to-face contacts with the customers for a long time, probably. And this will probably could be up and down.
Indeed.
So in a sense, what we investigated is probably going to be more similar to what will happen after the restart of the business.
Indeed. So tell us a little bit more about when you initially came up with this initial list of questions that you had in mind. Did you actually have a kind of a framework, because you've done a lot of work in your commercial lab on digital transformation and everything else? So was that also a trigger saying, let's take a look at what we did under normal circumstances, use the same kind of survey to try and see whether even between the time when things were normal and when things were just beginning to go bad? So did you use the same survey that you would have used?
No, for the very simple reason that basically what we do in our research center, what we have been doing in the last 3 years, has to do more with how can companies and managers manage the digital transformation of sales units, for example, or we develop some indexes or barometers of adoption of technologies, new technologies by salespeople. In this case, what happened is, how are you going to manage with the crisis, which is different, basically. So what we did so far was more investigating what is should be common practice, but actually it is not. How companies manage their everyday routines usually with a strategy in mind. They have a plan and they have some intention that they can execute more or less. The plan could be more or less clear, but that's normal, common practice and normal practice. That's what they do every day. Whereas in this case, it's something that they had to manage without any preparation in the end. And we simply looked at this very descriptive kind of research, what was going on, what they did and what worked and not. This is basically what we found with this study.
Fantastic. So now getting into the studies. So essentially you talked about strategies, you talked about how do they interact with the customer. So what were some key findings from your studies?
Well, the key findings is, first of all, the background. The background is, again, before the lockdown.
Yeah.
What we found is that basically salespeople, our sample has 236 salespeople from different industries. I mean, there are differences
exactly,
from one industry to another as well. But if we look at the aggregate picture, is on average, they said they had lost the personal face-to-face interaction with 60% of their customer base. Again, before the lockdown. And this was both before of new policies and procedures on the buying, on the side of the buying companies, but as well on the selling organization. They decided to stop visiting on face-to-face interaction their customer. That was the background. So 60% of personal connection were lost, and as a consequence of this, the prediction by salespeople was, well, we're probably going to lose on average 22% of our business, again, before the lockdown. Then 3 days later, that mean grew to 41. So you see how, because everything changed overnight. But even before the lockdown, it was minus 22 on average. Why? Because they were going to lose 60% of their customer base. At the same time, we asked them, okay, but can you keep this relationship alive using tools other than the interaction? And in this case, basically, they say, well, basically, we can still keep an ongoing relationship with our customer base with approximately 40% of the remaining customers using customers using technologies. And basically, what we look at, how many technologies do they use to interact with their customers once they cannot interact with them face-to-face, to face-to-face visits. And we investigated 5 different of them, and some are very basic. Just simply call them by the phone, right? Which is not visiting face-to-face. But in many cases, salespeople don't have the mobile phone number of their customers, so they cannot.
It's interesting,
They cannot call them because maybe they have the office number,
but people are working from.
They don't have the personal number. So you see, the strength of a personal connection turns into having more touch points, which is not just dropping an email, but could be calling by the phone or sending a WhatsApp message, or maybe interacting with them through web conferences or through social media. So they had more channels to interact with them. And what we found is that on average, 26% of our salespeople in our sample had used maximum 2 channels for interacting with their customers, and only 15% of the salespeople in the sample used all of these 5 different alternative channels for interacting with their customer base.
Paolo, quick question here. So the 15%, did you actually try and take a look at the correlation with ages, saying that some of the older salespeople only use 2? Because the common perception could be that along with age, younger people are more open to looking at different channels of communication. Or did you find that it's still too new that you're going to be looking more into the data in the future?
Actually, what we found is this is more affected by habits in a specific industry, or the kind of relationship that typically is there in a business, and the type of strategy, also how much the company stimulates the use of different or multiple channels. So, for example, we found that in the healthcare business, in the pharma and healthcare, there was a minimum use of alternative options, also because obviously if you sell to hospitals, even before the lockdown, it was almost impossible to get in touch with hospitals anymore. And generally speaking, that industry was more affected by the crisis, and in a sense that they could not use other channels. So that related to the industry specifically. But in this specific case, we did not look at the impact of age. But yes, in other studies we did, we had actually confirmation that age correlates significantly with the use of new technologies.
Well, it's interesting, because I'm sorry for interrupting, because I think I want to go back to one thing that you mentioned earlier, which is very, very, very interesting, is that one of the things you said when you ran the study was that some of the salespeople said that they were already thinking about using technology because your customers were locking down and saying that we will not be able to meet you face to face, which is of course understandable. But what I think was also interesting is that proactive kind of a way of sales organizations automatically saying that we need to look at alternate ways of reaching out. So essentially some companies were more proactive in even looking at using digital technologies to keep in touch with the customers. Were you in some way able to gauge whether these are also the companies that were much into digital transformation, or they're in specific industries where they were already beginning to move towards this, and they viewed this lockdown and the COVID and the eventual lockdown as a kind of a catalyst to put their sales strategy in place? Because you see what I mean? One thing is for you to be driven by your customers. The other thing is your own organization moving forward some paces because of this new situation.
I think that it is pretty clear in this case that some companies were much better prepared than others to deal with this issue. And so some companies and some sales forces actually, and even different sales people in the same company, no matter what the strategy is, maybe because of the age, maybe because of the specific customer base they deal with, maybe because of their individual preferences, we found in some previous research that there is sometimes a relatively big variance within the same company in terms of adoption of new technologies. Because of the age difference reasons, but also because some salespeople like to use it, some others simply don't like to use it. In some cases, this is reasonable, because in some cases, what we found is customers don't use technology; they don't want technology, and so they're not ready to it. So it would be meaningless to force them to use technology, because to force your sales force, because customers don't want it. So it may depend on a number of contingencies, but our perception is clear. Generally speaking, companies that were more prepared deal with this issue because they were more advanced in their path, digital transformation, were much better in dealing with this technology. And we had the confirmation of this with statistically speaking in our research. In this research, the last research we did, we found that for every alternative channel that companies use, the loss of forecasted revenues will decrease by 2.65%, which means that one more channel, you're going to save 2.65% reduction. If you use one more, again, it's another 2.65% lower reduction. So the more you use channel, we were able to quantify exactly in terms of 2.65% the lower reduction in terms of expected revenues because of the use of an additional channel, which I think is pretty much. And we are not talking about extremely sophisticated digital tools. For some of them, some other more mirror the strength of the relationship of the connection, which is not just where the location of the customer is, what the email is, or what the office phone is much more about having multiple channels for interacting with them and being ready to do that relatively soon.
I love this. So I'm sorry that I interrupted your chain of thought, but I think this is very, very interesting that what you're saying. And I think that I want the audience to not lose that part. And one question regarding the sample, and then we can go back into some of the other findings as well, is that did you find that those companies that are more prepared when compared to the others, that they were more in the tech heavy industry? You know what I mean? That say, for example, they were pretty much born in the cloud kind of companies like Salesforce or Microsoft or things like that, so that they're already predisposed to have a good opinion towards that? Or did you also find some traditional industries like, industrial manufacturers You see what I mean? They were also, some of them were also advanced in their digital outlook.
What we found, but it's not just related to this specific research.
Yeah.
What we found in several research projects in the last few years, and actually this is across different countries, not only in Italy, but it has been also in the UK, in Germany, and in the US, where we did some research. We found that there's a couple of industries that are less digitalized on average, and two are basically retailing and pharma and healthcare. These usually are the weakest in terms of being prepared and being advanced in terms of digital transformation. ICT is usually the top one.
Exactly.
So they usually are much more prepared because that's a normal way of working with them for them. Oftentimes, it's what we found is also that services are relatively more advanced because digitalization of services is pretty natural. It comes with digitalization of the service itself. So the digitalization of the process of selling comes more natural. Whereas if you sell goods, generally speaking, the mindset and the mindset of people in the organization and the focus is much more on the product, the production plants, and physical goods, which makes less sensitive to digitalization of processes, basically. So this is what we found.
Well, great. And did you by any chance gauge the readiness of the customers? Because a lot of times it could happen that you project loss in sales because you're not sure whether your customers are ready for this. Because it's one thing for you to be digitally ready, but it's another thing for you to have customers at a different pace as well, right? So is that something that you gauged, and maybe not in this study, but from your previous experiences about the readiness of the customer to accept this digital approach from the sales organization?
I can say a couple of things here. One is that through a number of qualitative interviews that we did across different industries, we oftentimes found that salespeople told us customers are much less prepared and willing to go digital than our company and our managers think. And that's the first insight that we got. Second is we investigated on a sample of more than 500 companies, again in 4 different countries, the US, the UK, Germany, and Italy. What was the main reason driving digital transformation in the sales organization? And we basically they had 3 options. The first is because customers want us to digitalize. Second was because competitors push us to digitalize. We want to follow competitors. And the third was we decide, no, we don't care so much about customers and competitors. We decide. And guess what? And clearly the number one option was it is an internal decision. So we decide to go that direction. Sometimes is even stronger or faster than or fairer than the market demands. Oftentimes, we then create some problems with salespeople.
Indeed, right?
We had salespeople telling us, I am given an iPad for interacting with the customer, and my customers say, oh, please take me some paper. I don't know what it is. Just print it out. Print it out. No, but I do have my digitalized catalog. And they say, no, please, I want the paper catalog. So obviously that could be not, the trend is clear. I mean, the trend is clear. I'm not saying that digitalization is stupid, but I'm saying that oftentimes what we found and on a broad set of companies across different industries is that it is largely a managerial decision, a strategic decision to go in that direction, even anticipating what customers and competitors are asking. And if you look at Italy specifically, but if you look at China, you will see a number of research now, and it is clear that in 2 weeks the acceleration of e-commerce, for example, has been much bigger than what happened in the last 3 years.
Indeed, and I think indeed.
And then again, for example, in our country, some retailers were ready to do that. Some other were not, and they are clearly winners. So again, it's a matter of being ready to that. So probably what could sound as a relatively lack of customer centricity, so I'm going that direction, I don't care about the customers, I'm going that direction, could actually turn out to be the best choice, because when you have an acceleration of this type, you are ready.
Wow.
You are ready. You
I
have
think,
invested time and research and knowledge and money for being prepared. And now if you are prepared, you're gonna survive much better, or you're gonna make a lot of money, like the big retailers. Some of them were ready, some other were not. And they're clearly winners and losers.
now, the other question I actually have is that amongst the people that you surveyed, did you actually also ask them questions about how much support did they actually get from their own organization in anticipation of these difficult times? So, for example, changes in the way they evaluated you, changes in the targets that they are going to set you and stuff like that. Were those some of the questions that you asked in your study, or what are your opinions on, if you didn't ask them in your study, but based on your knowledge and your knowledge of the market, do you think that that will have a big role to play about how salespeople view these new tools and are much more productive given these situations?
I think the big challenge for companies will be to anticipate how much of these changes will survive the crisis. Because I think maybe there is an oversimplification of reality in saying, for example, that everybody from now onwards will buy online. And I'm not so sure. I mean, it could be that obviously there had been an incredible acceleration, but it could be that you have some immediate changes that may not necessarily last over time. So, and in terms of managerial implications, I think that companies should be very careful in understanding to what extent they should invest in some technologies, on the redesign of some processes, or maybe in undersizing their sales force, in the extreme case, because of changes in the patterns of buying behaviors from their customers. So I think it's not so easy, it's not so obvious to predict what's going to happen. Also because we don't know exactly how long this whole situation will last, and how frequently we might have ups and downs. And so I think largely it is a matter of, it's not just a matter of technology. This is what we found clearly in several research projects. It's not just a matter of technology, because technology is there, and it's not the main problem. The main issue is actually the willingness, the clarity of the strategy by companies, clearly. And as a consequence of this, the ability to turn a strategic clarity into a number of managerial decisions that facilitate the adoption and the wise use of the right tools in the right way. And the psychological reaction of salespeople is extremely important. The last project that we did was on what we call Techno-stress and Techno-power, which is basically perceptions by salespeople about to what extent the digital transformation, which is not only about infusing technology, it's also about redesigning strategies and key performance indicators and processes. To what extent does it create stress in people more than the expected benefits in terms of empowering them and enabling them to perform better? So there is quite an ambiguity on this. It could be a double-edged sword. And so both things should be looked, because we don't have to forget that there is also a dark side in the adoption of technology that might impact salespeople and their everyday life. And it's first of all is about winning their willingness to actually adopt technology the right way.
Indeed. Which is what actually is my question, is that because I think, yes, it's definitely going to be like a crystal ball. You do not know what's going to happen afterwards, right? But what I was really interested in is in the time frame. So essentially in the sample that you had, did the salespeople feel that their organization and their managers were backing them with practices to, not about the future, but in that time period, in that time when you know that there's uncertainty, to back them in using technology? Because did they feel that, they might have techno-stress, but that could be kind of reduced by having a supportive organization or a supportive manager? So did you kind of gauge it, or at least I'm sure that you talked to a lot of sales managers, so maybe it was not part of your research then, but what is the feeling that you have about salespeople actually turning to their organization to say, hey, tell us, how should we work right now? Yes, you ask us to use digitally, but how will it affect the way I'm going to be evaluated? What am I going to be evaluated on? And I'm not saying it for 6 months from now. I'm talking about for the duration of the lockdown or that stuff.
For this research specifically, we did not collect this data.
Yeah.
But I had several interviews with and conversations with different companies, and I think that in this moment specifically, salespeople are largely lost. Because selling is largely a routine job. You have your daily routine, and this is completely or largely stopped or completely changed. So they need to find support at the individual interpersonal level by their supervisor. This is in these days what my perception as a researcher by talking to managers is mainly this is more a psychological support in this moment, more than a practical support on how to use technologies but obviously compensation matters. So how do they protect the loss of money in their sales force is a key priority now, and it is largely a matter of reassuring or providing some safeguard and some protection in the very short term. At the same, so this is an urgency that they have to manage mainly psychologically, plus with some specific intervention. And those who have good financial resources can basically anticipate money to their sales force and even to their customers. This is what many companies are doing. This is what I see if they can. So basically, they're taking the risk of the short-term loss on their own shoulder. And if they can do it, that's the best way to keep a positive relationship with your sales force, right? They are postponing, or they are giving money even to their partners or to their channel partners, to their customers for things that are planned to be done in 6 months from now.
Indeed.
So they're giving budget now to their customers because they know that most of their customers are in troubles financially, and the same is true for many sales forces. So if they can do it, they do it, and this is the most practical intervention that they can make in the very short time. At the same time, they are trying to plan what's going to be next, and then they are trying to develop a meaningful strategy. And this is obviously a very challenging and difficult effort because this is largely affected by government regulations that they are not in charge of, that they cannot really influence, basically. So this is for the current situation. In a broader perspective, what we found, going back to your question, basically, is that we found that social influence in the company is a stronger predictor of technology adoption and of behavioral changes related to digital transformation. And obviously, the main influencers are typically the supervisors. It could be, the top managers and the colleagues and peers, but mainly is the supervisor. So the supervisor has a key role in doing this. We did not find a lot of evidence in terms of redesigning performance management, evaluation processes, and reward system specifically in line with the goals of digital transformation. And we found that this is one of the biggest gaps that are there in companies that don't have an overarching and comprehensive and consistent plan for managing all these different things. So we found evidence of companies telling us, basically, we changed the strategy and we have to go to use the more digital tools, but in the end, I'm still evaluated and rewarded based on old criteria. So there is kind of stickiness it is quite slow, the adaptation and the change of all these relevant ingredients. And I perfectly agree with you. This is relevant. This is one of the weakest points in companies and in organizations for successfully driving digital transformation in sales processes.
I think the fact is that I think my takeaway from this is the following. And again, I'm not know if I'm going to be right or not, but here is what I'm taking away from all the things that you said. One is there has to be a kind of a psychological taking care of my salespeople right now, because what you do not want is already they're going to have techno-stress because of having to use these new technologies. On top of that, they don't have to worry about all the other things, whether they're going to hit their compensation or not. For me, that's one aspect of how we have to help manage in this time frame. The second thing is in the long run, which I think is very, very interesting, is that once you've had this experience that even organizations that were not ready to digitally transform before, they need to understand that digital transformation is not just saying that my salespeople have to use these new tools. It's rethinking their whole sales management process, all the way from target setting, the sales process, target setting, metrics, and supporting the salespeople. And I'm sure that hopefully the learnings for a lot of organizations which were not there yet is that use this time. Yes, take care of your salespeople now, but also lay the groundwork for the future. Because when this happens, what this has taught us, if anything at all, is that just because you're going to do digital transformation does not necessarily mean just we're going to give you more tools. It also needs to rethink. You need to rethink the way you're looking at your sales force and your sales strategy and how you're going to deploy it. And that for me is the key takeaway, if anything at all, that in the short run, understand that you have to take care of your salespeople now with whatever means possible. But don't forget that in the long run, again, we are not very sure what's going to happen, but the key thing is that digital is going to stay. The question is, don't overjump it, but think about the impact it has on your sales management processes as well. I think that's my takeaway from your findings of this.
If I can say one final thing about it, I think that if we can see something positive in this tragic and disastrous and tragic situation, is that probably this is a time for thinking for all of us. For me personally, I mean, I'm locked into my house, and I cannot act for many things. In many instances, in some industries, this is not the case. But for many companies I talk to, they are in the same situation. So basically, the business is completely stopped. So they cannot act. What they can do is, this is a time for thinking. And we always say that we don't have enough time for thinking. And in companies, especially in sales, you don't have time for thinking so much. So if we want to see something positive, and I want to see something positive here, is we have a chance, we have an opportunity to think more strategically on how we can improve on a number of things. For example, how can we better manage in a more comprehensive and consistent way a digital transformation in sales organization, because this has largely been done with trial and error approaches without enough thinking. Now we can think. We have no excuses as managers, and as well as researchers or educators. We have no excuses. Managers have no excuses now. They can think, and they can stimulate thinking in their people if they are good leaders. Obviously, there is a time when they have to act, that's for sure. But thinking is not wasted time. It is exactly the opposite. So my message would be, if you cannot act, well, there's something positive on it. You can think. You must think rapidly and wisely. Do it.
Great. Thank you so much, Paolo, for taking the time to talk to me and our audience as well. I do hope that you and your fellow countrymen are safe and come out of this lockdown in a much more positive frame of mind, given all these tragic circumstances. And I look forward to having much more meaningful conversations with you in the future. And thank you again for taking the time.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity and the chance to share this thoughts and reflection. I hope it was useful, and
absolutely
keep in touch. I wish you all the best. Stay safe, and hope to meet you all in the future on a happier circumstance.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.